his expression, the way he watched her retreat with the focused intensity of a predator selecting prey. The second encounter had been at the theatre 3 nights later, where the Fairfax family had taken a box for a performance of Hamlet. During the interval, when Arabella had stepped into the corridor for a breath of air away from the stuffy confines of the box, she had found Lord Bennet materializing at her elbow as though he had been waiting for just such an opportunity. He had been more forward this time, complimenting her appearance with a familiarity that exceeded the bounds of their minimal acquaintance, and suggesting that perhaps they might take a turn in the lobby, together. Arabella had refused as politely as she could manage, citing her mother's expectation of her return, but Bennet's hand had briefly touched her arm as she moved past him, a touch that felt more like a claim than a courtesy. Now, a week after the Vauxhall meeting and 10 days since Frederick's devastating announcement at the Whitmore ball, Arabella found herself at a garden party hosted by the Gardiners at their estate in Richmond. It was a beautiful June afternoon, the kind that made London society forget the grime and noise of the city and remember why England's gardens were celebrated throughout the world. The Gardiner estate was modest by aristocratic standards, but beautifully maintained, with terraced gardens that descended toward the Thames, rose arbors heavy with blooms in every shade from palest pink to deepest crimson, and serpentine paths that wound through beds of lavender and jasmine. The party was a substantial affair, with perhaps 80 guests scattered across the lawns and gardens, taking tea at small tables set up beneath striped awnings, admiring the plantings, or strolling the paths in groups of 2 or 3. Arabella had come with her mother and sister, grateful for the opportunity to be out of doors after several days of rain had confined them to the house. She had worn a dress of sprigged muslin in pale yellow, one of her few truly pretty gowns, and had allowed Lydia to persuade her to wear her hair in a softer style than usual, with curls framing her face rather than pulled severely back. For a few hours, she had almost succeeded in relaxing her guard, in simply enjoying the sunshine and the perfume of roses and the pleasure of watching her sister flirt harmlessly with a young lieutenant of her acquaintance. It was therefore a shock when she rounded a bend in one of the garden paths, having separated from her family to admire a particularly fine specimen of climbing roses, and found Lord Bennet blocking her way. He stood at the entrance to a small rose arbour, a secluded spot where a curved bench sat surrounded by trellises heavy with blooms, and his positioning was clearly deliberate, preventing her from passing without either retreating obviously or brushing past him in a way that would require uncomfortable proximity. His smile as he saw her was sharp, predatory, nothing like the expression of a gentleman pleased to encounter a lady of his acquaintance. "Lady Arabella," he said, executing a bow that somehow managed to seem mocking rather than respectful. "How fortunate to find you alone. I have been hoping for an opportunity to speak with you privately." "I am not alone," Arabella replied, keeping her voice steady with effort. "My mother and sister are nearby, and I must return to them shortly." She moved as though to step around him, but he shifted smoothly to maintain his blocking position, still smiling that unpleasant smile. "Surely you can spare a few moments for conversation," he said, his tone suggesting that this was not really a request. "We have much to discuss, you and I. I cannot imagine what we might have to discuss, my lord," Arabella said, fighting to keep the tremor from her voice. "We are barely acquainted." His smile widened, and something cold moved in his pale eyes. "Are we not? And yet I feel I know you quite well, Lady Arabella. I know, for instance, that you attended the Vauxhall Gardens last Tuesday evening at twilight, alone, without chaperone or companion. That is a rather remarkable thing for a lady of quality to do, is it not?" The words hit Arabella like ice water. He had been watching her, had perhaps been following her. The implications were terrifying, but she forced herself to maintain her composure, to give no sign of the panic rising in her chest. "I have no idea what you mean," she said coolly. "You must be mistaken." "Must I?" Bennet took a step closer, crowding into her space in a way that was overtly threatening. "I think not. I have made it my business to learn a great deal about you, my dear Lady Arabella. Your habits, your movements, your associations. It is remarkable what one can discover with sufficient motivation. His hand shot out suddenly, gripping her arm above the elbow with a force that made her gasp. You will find that I am not a man to be trifled with. I know you met someone in that maze, though I have not yet determined who, but it hardly matters. The fact of the meeting itself is enough to destroy your reputation if it became known. A lady of unblemished character does not steal away to Vauxhall at twilight for innocent purposes. Arabella tried to pull her arm free, but his grip only tightened, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave bruises. "Release me at once!" she demanded, no longer caring about keeping her voice low. "You are hurting me." "I will release you when you agree to hear my proposal," Bennett said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You have something I want, my dear. Land that will soon be very valuable indeed. And I have the means to ruin you completely. I suggest we come to an arrangement that benefits us both. Marriage to me will secure your reputation and provide your family with a connection to a title of some consequence. In return, I will gain access to property that is rightfully mine by marriage. It is a simple transaction, really." Arabella felt true fear then, looking into eyes that held no warmth, no humanity, only cold calculation and the desperate determination of a man with nothing left to lose. She opened her mouth to scream, "Propriety be damned!" But before she could make a sound, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Lord Bennett, I believe you are wanted in the main garden. My father was asking after you." The voice was female, cool and aristocratic, utterly composed, and it belonged to the last person Arabella would have expected to come to her aid. Lady Henrietta Dashwood stood at the entrance to the rose arbour, resplendent in a gown of ice-blue silk that matched her eyes, her expression one of polite disdain as she regarded the scene before her. Her gaze took in Bennett's grip on Arabella's arm, the proximity of their bodies, and the fear in Arabella's face, and something flickered in those cool blue eyes, something that might have been anger, though her voice remained perfectly modulated. Lord Bennett released Arabella's arm so quickly she nearly stumbled, stepping back with a smoothness that suggested long practice at extricating himself from compromising situations. "Lady Henrietta," he said, his tone shifting to one of false geniality, "I was not aware Lord Pemberton was in attendance today." "He is not," Henrietta replied, her voice carrying a subtle edge that made the words a dismissal rather than a statement. "I merely wished to interrupt what appeared to be an uncomfortable conversation. Lady Fairfax looks quite distressed. Perhaps you might leave us, my lord. It is clear your presence is unwanted." For a moment, Bennett's mask slipped, and Arabella saw raw fury flash across his features before he controlled it. But he was not so far gone in desperation that he would openly defy the daughter of one of England's most powerful earls, particularly not when that daughter was engaged to a duke. He executed another of his mocking bows, this one directed at both ladies, and smiled with all the warmth of a snake. "Of course, please forgive any distress I may have inadvertently caused. Lady Fairfax and I were merely discussing matters of mutual interest, but the conversation can certainly be continued at another time." He walked past Henrietta without waiting for a response, his shoulder brushing hers in a gesture that was just shy of openly rude, and disappeared down the garden path toward the main party. Arabella sagged against the trellis, her legs suddenly unreliable, her arm throbbing where Bennett's fingers had gripped. Henrietta watched until the man was out of sight before turning back to Arabella, her expression shifting from aristocratic disdain to something more complex, something that might have been sympathy mixed with calculation. "Walk with me, Lady Fairfax," she said, offering her arm in a gesture that was both support and command. "We have much to discuss, you and I think it best we do so somewhere less exposed than a rose arbour, where anyone might stumble upon us." Arabella accepted the offered arm more from necessity than choice, still too shaken by the encounter with Bennet to fully process the strangeness of receiving aid from her rival, if rival was even the correct term for the woman engaged to the man Arabella loved. They walked in silence for several minutes, Henrietta guiding them along paths that led away from the main gathering toward a more secluded section of the garden where a small gazebo overlooked the river. The structure was octagonal, built of white-painted wood with latticed sides that provided privacy while allowing air and light to filter through. Henrietta led, Arabella inside, and gestured for her to sit on one of the cushioned benches that lined the interior. Once they were both seated, Henrietta studied Arabella with those cool blue eyes, her expression unreadable. Finally she spoke, and her words were nothing Arabella could have anticipated. "Frederick told you of the arrangement, I presume, about why our engagement was announced so publicly and so suddenly." Arabella stared at her, unable to formulate a response. Henrietta's mouth curved in what might have been amusement. "I see that he did. Good. That will make this conversation considerably easier. You need not look so shocked, Lady Fairfax. Did you think I was ignorant of the Duke's true feelings, that I believed his protestations of regard when he proposed an engagement of convenience?" Arabella found her voice, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. "He told me that you understood the arrangement, that it was mutually beneficial, but I did not realize you knew about me, about his feelings for you." Henrietta supplied calmly. "Of course I know. A woman would have to be blind not to see how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching, how his attention follows you across every ballroom, how he seeks your conversation above all others. I have known Frederick since childhood, Lady Fairfax. Our families have been connected for generations. I know him well enough to recognize when his heart is engaged, and it has been engaged with you for quite some time." "Then why?" Arabella began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the question without giving offense. "Why agree to an engagement to a man whose heart belongs to another?" Henrietta finished for her. "The answer is quite simple, because it suits my purposes as well as his." She smoothed her skirts with elegant fingers, her manner matter-of-fact, as though they were discussing the weather rather than matters of the heart. "My father, the Earl of Pemberton, is a man of great ambition and very little patience. He has determined that I should make a brilliant match, preferably to a duke, and he is not a man who accepts refusal gracefully. For the past 3 seasons, he has paraded me before every eligible peer in England, growing increasingly insistent that I secure a title of sufficient consequence." The pressure had become intolerable. Arabella was beginning to understand. "So when Frederick proposed this arrangement, it freed you from your father's demands." "Precisely," Henrietta confirmed. "I gain the title and position my father requires without the burden of a husband who would expect romantic devotion I cannot provide. Frederick gains a screen for his true feelings and a reason to be seen as occupied so that Lord Bennet does not perceive him as competition for your hand. It is a practical solution to multiple problems." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "Or it would be, if Bennet were merely the dissolute fortune hunter Frederick believes him to be. But I fear the situation is more dangerous than either of you realize." Arabella leaned forward, her earlier fear returning. "What do you mean? What do you know of Lord Bennet?" "More than I should," Henrietta said grimly. "My father moves in political circles where information is currency, and I have learned over the years to listen at doors and read documents left carelessly on desks. Lord Bennet is not simply in debt, Lady Fairfax. He is ruined utterly and completely. He owes money to some of the most dangerous men in London, men who do not accept excuses or delays, men who have been known to arrange accidents for those who cannot pay. His creditors have given him until the end of summer to settle his debts or face consequences that would make social disgrace seem trivial by comparison." Arabella felt cold despite the warmth of the June afternoon. "And my land is his solution. The railway company's payment would be enough to save him. It would be enough to keep him alive," Henrietta corrected, "which makes him far more dangerous than a mere fortune hunter. A man facing financial ruin might be deterred by scandal or social pressure. A man facing death will stop at nothing. She turned to face Arabella directly, and for the first time, genuine emotion showed in her cool features. "He will try to force you into marriage, Lady Fairfax, and he will not be particular about his methods. The threat he made just now about ruining your reputation is only the beginning. If that fails, he will escalate. He might arrange a more serious compromise, one that cannot be explained away. He might even resort to abduction. Men in his position have done worse." Arabella's hand went to her throat, her mind reeling. "Frederick said he would protect me, that the engagement to you would make Bennet believe he had no rival." "That was the plan," Henrietta agreed. "And it might have worked if Bennet were operating on a more leisurely timeline. But he is not. He grows more desperate by the day, and desperate men make reckless choices. The fact that he confronted you so boldly today, in a garden full of guests where anyone might have witnessed, suggests his desperation is overcoming his caution." She reached out and took Arabella's hand in hers, a gesture of unexpected solidarity. "We must work together, you and I, to ensure Bennet cannot succeed. Frederick's plan is sound but incomplete. He thinks like a gentleman, assuming Bennet will behave according to certain rules. But men like Bennet acknowledge no rules when their survival is at stake." Arabella looked at this woman, this stranger who should have been her enemy, but was instead offering alliance, and felt a surge of confused gratitude. "Why are you helping me? You could simply let Bennet succeed in his scheme. It would remove me from your path entirely." Henrietta's expression softened slightly, a hint of genuine warmth breaking through her usual cool composure. "Because despite what you may think, I am not entirely heartless. I do not love Frederick, nor does he love me, but I respect him greatly. He is a good man, one of the few truly honorable men I have encountered in society. He deserves happiness, and his happiness clearly lies with you." She paused, her mouth curving in a slight smile. "Besides, I have no patience for men like Bennet who think they can force women into submission through threats and violence. If I can play a role in thwarting his schemes, I shall take considerable satisfaction in doing so." "What do you propose?" Arabella asked, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since that terrible moment at the Whitmore ball. "First, you must tell me everything Frederick told you about Bennet's plans," Henrietta said briskly. "Then I will share what I know from my father's papers. Between us, we may be able to piece together enough information to anticipate Bennet's next move and counter it before he can act." For the next half hour, the two women sat in the gazebo and pooled their knowledge, Arabella recounting everything Frederick had revealed in the Vauxhall maze, Henrietta adding details she had gleaned from overheard conversations and documents she had seen in her father's study. A picture emerged of a man driven to increasingly reckless acts by mounting desperation, a man who had already made subtle inquiries about obtaining a special license for a hasty marriage, who had been seen in the company of men known for their willingness to arrange all manner of unsavory services for the right price, and who had apparently been watching Arabella's movements for weeks with the focused intensity of a man planning a campaign. By the time they had finished comparing information, both women were pale with the understanding of just how serious the threat actually was. Bennet was not simply hoping to compromise Arabella's reputation through rumors. He was planning something far more concrete, something that would make marriage to him seem not just advisable, but necessary. "We must tell Frederick immediately," Arabella said, rising from the bench. "He needs to know that the danger is more imminent than he believed." "We will tell him," Henrietta agreed, also standing. "But we must be careful how we communicate. If Bennet is watching you as closely as we suspect, any contact with Frederick could alert him to the fact that we are aware of his plans." She paused, thinking. "There is a ball at Devonshire House tomorrow night. Both you and Frederick will be in attendance, as will I. We can arrange a meeting there, somewhere private enough for conversation, but public enough that our gathering will not seem overtly suspicious. Until then, you must take every precaution. Do not go anywhere alone, not even in your own garden. Vary your routine so that Bennet cannot predict your movements, and if he approaches you again, make sure there are witnesses present." Arabella nodded, her mind already racing ahead to all the dangers she had been oblivious to until now. "Thank you, Lady Henrietta, for the warning and for the alliance. I know this cannot be easy for you." Henrietta's expression was unreadable. "You would be surprised what I find easy, Lady Fairfax. I have spent my entire life navigating the treacherous waters of society and managing the expectations of men who believe they have the right to control my choices. This is merely another challenge to be met and overcome." They walked back toward the main party in silence, but it was a companionable silence now rather than the awkward tension of rivals. As they emerged onto the main lawn, Henrietta paused and turned to Arabella with a slight smile. "One more thing, Lady Fairfax. When this is over, when Bennet has been dealt with and you and Frederick are free to acknowledge your feelings openly, I expect to be invited to the wedding. It shall be small compensation for playing the role of abandoned fiancée, but I shall endeavour to appear appropriately heartbroken for the benefit of society." Despite everything, despite the fear and the danger and the impossible tangle of circumstances, Arabella found herself smiling back. "You shall have a place of honour, Lady Henrietta. I give you my word." "Good," Henrietta replied. "Now, let us return you to your mother before your absence is noted and provides more fodder for gossip." As they rejoined the party, Arabella caught sight of Lord Bennet watching them from across the lawn, his expression calculating and cold. But now, instead of facing the threat alone with only Frederick's distant protection, she had an unexpected ally, one who understood the rules of society and the ways of dangerous men, and who had her own reasons for wanting to see Bennet's schemes fail. The game had become more complex, the stakes higher, but for the first time since that night at Vauxhall, Arabella felt something other than helpless fear. She felt the beginning of hope, and the determination to fight for the future she wanted, rather than accept the one being forced upon her. Tomorrow night at Devonshire House, they would formulate a plan. Together, the three of them would find a way to defeat Lord Bennet and his machinations. And perhaps, just perhaps, there might be a path forward that led to happiness rather than sacrifice, to love acknowledged rather than hidden, to a future that belonged to them rather than to duty and circumstance. The Rose Arbor encounter had been terrifying, but it had also brought an unexpected gift in the form of Henrietta's alliance. Sometimes, Arabella reflected as she rejoined her family, and tried to focus on the mundane pleasantries of a garden party. Sometimes the most unlikely allies were the ones who understood the battle best. And in Lady Henrietta Dashwood, she had found not a rival but a fellow strategist, a woman who played the game of society with skill and determination, and who had chosen to deploy those skills in service of love rather than against it. The ball at Devonshire House the previous evening had allowed Frederick, Henrietta, and Arabella to meet briefly in the conservatory, ostensibly to admire the exotic orchids, while in reality sharing intelligence and formulating their defence against Lord Bennet's inevitable escalation. Frederick had listened with growing alarm as Henrietta detailed the extent of Bennet's desperation, his jaw tightening when Arabella described the encounter in the Gardiner Rose Arbor and the bruises that still marked her arm beneath her long gloves. His instinct had been to confront Bennet directly, to use his considerable power and influence to crush the man completely. But both women had persuaded him that such an approach would only drive Bennet to act more recklessly and quickly. Instead, they had agreed to remain vigilant, to never allow Arabella to be alone or vulnerable, and to watch for the trap they all knew was coming. What none of them had anticipated was how soon it would spring, or how public Bennet would make his final gambit. The Tilney soirée 3 nights later was meant to be an intimate gathering, a musical followed by supper for perhaps 60 guests, the sort of refined entertainment that marked the latter part of the London season, when the truly fashionable families began to drift toward their country estates. Arabella had attended with her mother and sister, wearing a gown of rose silk that Lydia had insisted brought out the warmth in her complexion, her dark hair arranged in an elegant style that made her look older than her 23 years. She had been cautious all evening, keeping close to her family or to groups of acquaintances, acutely aware of Lord Bennet's presence across the drawing-room, where he stood in conversation with several other gentlemen, his pale eyes tracking her movements with predatory focus. Frederick was also present, arrived late with Lady Henrietta on his arm, and though he did not approach Arabella directly, she felt the comfort of his presence like a shield, knowing he was watching over her even from a distance. The musicale portion of the evening had concluded with a performance by a celebrated soprano imported from Milan at great expense, and the guests had begun to move toward the dining room, where supper was laid out on long tables draped in damask. It was during this transitional period, when the assembly was dispersed and distracted, that Arabella received the note. A footman had approached discreetly, offering a small folded paper on a silver salver, and Arabella had taken it automatically, assuming it to be some communication from her mother or perhaps an invitation to join a particular supper table. Instead, the message was unsigned and brief, claiming to be from Lady Henrietta and requesting that Arabella meet her in the library immediately regarding a matter of utmost urgency concerning their mutual friend. Arabella's first instinct was suspicion. The note seemed too convenient, too perfectly designed to separate her from the safety of the crowd. But the mention of their mutual friend, clearly, meaning Frederick, gave her pause. What if something had happened? What if Bennet had made some move against Frederick himself? What if Henrietta truly needed to speak with her urgently? She looked around for Henrietta, intending to verify the note's authenticity, but could not locate her in the crush of guests moving between rooms. Her mother was engaged in conversation with Lady Morland, and had not noticed Arabella's distraction. Lydia had disappeared somewhere with her lieutenant, likely stealing a moment of flirtation in some corner. Frederick she could not approach without raising eyebrows, particularly as he stood with a group of gentlemen discussing what appeared to be political matters. The library, Arabella knew, was just down the corridor from the main drawing-room, a journey of perhaps 30 seconds. Surely she could slip away briefly, verify whether Henrietta had actually sent the note, and return before her absence was noticed. It was a calculated risk, but the alternative, ignoring a potentially genuine warning about danger to Frederick, seemed worse. She made her decision and moved as casually as she could manage toward the doorway, pausing to exchange a brief pleasantry with an acquaintance to establish that her departure appeared unhurried and innocent. The corridor outside the drawing-room was dimly lit, illuminated only by wall sconces placed at intervals, and the thick carpet muffled her footsteps as she walked toward the library door. She could hear the murmur of conversation and music fading behind her as she moved deeper into the quieter regions of the house, and a prickle of unease ran down her spine, even as she told herself she was being foolish. The library door was slightly ajar, a slice of lamplight spilling into the corridor, and Arabella pushed it open fully, expecting to find Henrietta waiting inside. Instead, the room appeared empty, a gentleman's domain of dark wood paneling, leather furniture, and walls lined floor to ceiling with books. A fire burned low in the grate, and several lamps had been lit, creating pools of golden light that left the corners in shadow. Arabella stepped inside, confused, looking around for any sign of Henrietta or any explanation for the summons. It was then that she heard voices in the corridor behind her, multiple voices approaching rapidly, and understanding hit her like a physical blow. She had been lured here. This was the trap. She spun toward the door, intending to leave immediately, but it was too late. Lord Bennet appeared in the doorway, blocking her exit, and behind him were at least 4 other gentlemen, their expressions a mixture of shock, curiosity, and in some cases barely concealed glee at having stumbled upon a scandal. "Lady Fairfax," Bennet said loudly, his voice carrying back toward the main rooms where other guests would surely hear. "How unexpected to find you here alone. I had understood you to be a lady of impeccable virtue, yet here you are, secreted away in a private room during a social gathering." The implications were clear and devastating. A lady discovered alone in a private room could claim innocent confusion. A lady discovered alone with a gentleman, or worse, appearing to be waiting for one, faced ruin. Arabella's mind raced frantically, searching for an explanation that would not sound like a desperate lie. "I received a note," she began, then stopped, realizing how pathetic it sounded. "A note asking me to meet someone here regarding an urgent matter." Bennett's smile was triumphant. "A note? How very convenient. And who, pray tell, were you meant to be meeting in this clandestine fashion?" Before Arabella could formulate an answer, before the full weight of the disaster could settle upon her, the door to an adjoining room opened, one Arabella had not even noticed in her panic, and two figures emerged into the library. Frederick and Henrietta stepped through the connecting doorway with perfect composure, as though it were entirely natural for them to be sequestered together in a private room adjoining the library. They were not touching, not arranged in any way that suggested impropriety, but their presence together in such intimate circumstances would itself have been scandalous had they not been engaged. Frederick held a book in his hands, and Henrietta carried what appeared to be a miniature painting, both items clearly selected from the room they had just exited, which Arabella now realized must be some sort of study or sitting room. "Bennett," Frederick said coolly, his pale eyes taking in the scene with a glance that missed nothing, the Earl's son blocking Arabella's exit. The group of men crowded behind him, the calculation and fury barely concealed on Bennett's face. "How unexpected to find you here. I was not aware you were invited to this gathering." "Lord Tilney is an old friend," Bennett replied, his smooth tone not quite concealing his frustration at finding his trap sprung differently than planned. "I might ask what brings your grace to this section of the house, away from the other guests and in the company of your fiancée." "Hardly scandalous for an engaged couple to seek a few moments of privacy," Frederick replied with aristocratic disdain. "Lady Henrietta wished to show me a particular miniature that Lord Tilney keeps in his private collection, a portrait by Hilliard that she thought might interest me given my own collection of such works." He gestured with the book he held, and I was consulting this volume on Elizabethan art to verify the attribution. "All perfectly innocent and easily explained." His gaze moved to Arabella, who stood frozen across the room, her hands clutching the back of a leather chair for support. "Lady Fairfax, I presume you were also drawn by interest in Lord Tilney's collection?" The question was delivered smoothly, providing her with an explanation, an escape from Bennett's trap. But Arabella's mind was still reeling, trying to understand how Frederick and Henrietta had known to be here, how they had anticipated Bennett's move so precisely. "I received a note," she said slowly, deciding that truth was safer than invention. "A note claiming to be from Lady Henrietta, requesting I meet her here regarding an urgent matter. When I arrived, the room appeared empty." "I see," Henrietta said, her voice cool and controlled. "How very peculiar. I sent no such note, Lady Fairfax. It would appear someone has been playing games with both our reputations." She turned to Bennet with an expression of arctic disdain. "How fortunate that the Duke and I happened to be nearby, else poor Lady Fairfax might have been compromised by this mysterious summons. One might almost think the note was designed to create exactly such a scandal." Bennet's face had gone white with fury, his carefully constructed trap dismantled before his eyes. But he was not yet defeated. His mind worked visibly, searching for an angle, a way to salvage something from the wreckage of his plan, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of desperation disguised as righteous indignation. "How very convenient," he said, his words dripping with false concern, "that your Grace and your fiancée should be positioned so perfectly to rescue Lady Fairfax from a compromising situation." One might almost wonder if the entire scenario was arranged, if perhaps Lady Fairfax's presence here was not quite as innocent as it appears. He stepped into the library fully, forcing the other gentlemen to follow or be left in the corridor. "Are we to believe that Lady Fairfax simply wandered into this room by chance at the precise moment you and Lady Henrietta were examining Lord Tilney's collection? Or is there perhaps a more interesting explanation, one that involves secret assignations and clandestine meetings? The accusation hung in the air, ugly and dangerous, and Arabella saw several of the gentlemen behind Bennet exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from shock to speculation. Bennet was attempting to turn the situation around, to suggest that she and Frederick had been meeting secretly, that Henrietta's presence was some sort of elaborate cover for an affair. It was a desperate gambit, but desperation made it no less dangerous. Frederick's expression went cold, colder than Arabella had ever seen it, and when he spoke his voice carried the full weight of his rank and authority. "You will withdraw that implication immediately, Bennet, or you will answer to me for it. To suggest that a lady of quality would engage in such behavior is beyond the bounds of acceptable discourse. I demand you apologize to Lady Fairfax at once." But Bennet had clearly decided to stake everything on this final throw of the dice. His creditors were closing in, his time was running out, and if he could not have Arabella's land through marriage, he would at least have the satisfaction of destroying those who had thwarted him. He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "An apology? From me? I think not, Your Grace. You demand satisfaction for an insult to Lady Fairfax's honor, yet where was your concern for honor when you were carrying her unconscious form from the Whitmore ballroom? When you were kneeling at her side with an intimacy that far exceeded what propriety allows? When you have been observed watching her at every social gathering with an attention that suggests far more than casual acquaintance?" He turned to address the other gentleman, playing to his audience. "I put it to you, sirs, that the Duke of Claiborne has been trifling with Lady Fairfax while publicly engaged to Lady Henrietta Dashwood, that this engagement is nothing more than a screen for an inappropriate attachment, that Lady Fairfax's presence here tonight was by design, not accident, part of a pattern of secret meetings that has been ongoing for months." The drawing-room had fallen silent, and Arabella realized with horror that more people were gathering in the corridor, drawn by the raised voices and the promise of scandal. Among them she saw her mother, her face pale with shock, and Lady Tilney, the hostess, looking appalled that such a scene was unfolding in her home. Bennet pressed his advantage, his voice rising. "I have witnesses who can testify to Lady Fairfax's presence at Vauxhall Gardens at twilight without chaperone. I have testimony that she and the Duke have been conducting a clandestine correspondence. I have evidence of meetings in public places where they believed themselves unobserved." He turned back to Frederick, his expression triumphant despite the madness of what he was doing, destroying his own reputation in society even as he attempted to destroy theirs. "So I ask you, Your Grace, which lady has claim to your honor? The one you are publicly engaged to, or the one you have been secretly pursuing? Will you defend Lady Fairfax and admit your engagement to Lady Henrietta is a sham, or will you maintain the fiction and allow Lady Fairfax's reputation to be destroyed? The choice is yours, but you cannot protect them both." The room seemed to hold its breath, every eye fixed on Frederick, whose face had gone rigid with suppressed emotion. Arabella could see the calculation in his eyes, the rapid assessment of options, the impossible position Bennet had created. If Frederick defended her too vigorously, he would be admitting to an inappropriate attachment while engaged to another woman, destroying both his honor and Henrietta's reputation. If he maintained the fiction of his engagement and treated Arabella as merely a casual acquaintance, her reputation would be shredded by Bennet's accusations and innuendo. There was no good choice, no path forward that did not sacrifice someone. Arabella watched emotions flicker across Frederick's face, saw the moment his composure began to crack, saw him drawing breath to speak words that would probably destroy the careful fiction they had constructed, and in that instant she knew what she had to do. She stepped forward, moving, to the center of the library where everyone could see her clearly, and when she spoke her voice was calm, steady, utterly composed despite the terror churning in her stomach. "Lord Bennet's accusations are both slanderous and absurd," she said clearly. The Duke of Claiborne has never behaved toward me with anything other than the courtesy due any lady of his acquaintance. His engagement to Lady Henrietta is perfectly genuine, as anyone with eyes can see. As for my presence at Vauxhall Gardens, I was there as companion to my elderly aunt, Mrs. Beatrice Morland, who resides in Hampstead and who enjoys the gardens on fine evenings. She paused, letting the lie settle, knowing it could be verified or disproved, but gambling that Bennet had no actual witnesses, only supposition and speculation. However, Lord Bennet's interest in my movements and his attempts to manufacture scandal where none exists have made me most uncomfortable. Therefore, I have decided to accept my aunt's long-standing invitation to serve as her companion at her estate in Scotland. I will be departing London within the week and do not anticipate returning for the foreseeable future. The gasps that greeted this announcement were audible even over the murmur of speculation, and Arabella saw her mother's face drain of all colour, saw Lydia's expression of complete shock, saw Lady Tilney's relief that the scandal was resolving itself in a way that required no action on her part. But it was Frederick's reaction that nearly broke her resolve. His face went absolutely white, all his aristocratic composure shattering in an instant as the implications of her words sank in. She was removing herself from London, from society, from any possibility of marriage to him or to anyone. She was sacrificing her entire future to protect both his reputation and her own, choosing exile over scandal, choosing to preserve what they had built even if it meant destroying any chance of happiness. "No," he said, the single word escaping before he could stop it, raw and anguished. "Lady Fairfax, you cannot, that is, there is no need for such drastic measures." Henrietta placed a hand on his arm, a gesture that appeared supportive, but was clearly meant to restrain him from saying more, from revealing too much. "The Duke is quite right," she said smoothly, her cool voice a counterpoint to Frederick's emotion. "Surely such an extreme step is unnecessary, Lady Fairfax. Lord Bennet's wild accusations have no foundation, as everyone present can surely see. To leave London over such nonsense would be to give them credence they do not deserve." But Arabella shook her head, her eyes meeting Frederick's for just a moment, trying to convey in that brief glance all the love and regret and desperate hope that she could not speak aloud. "My decision is made, Lady Henrietta, though I thank you for your concern. My aunt grows elderly and has need of a companion. It is a respectable position, one that will suit me well." She turned to face Bennet directly, and allowed a note of steel to enter her voice. "As for Lord Bennet's insinuations, I trust that with my departure from London, his interest in my activities will cease. If it does not, I shall be forced to bring formal charges of harassment and slander, which I am certain my cousin, the magistrate in Derbyshire, would be most interested to investigate." The threat was subtle but clear, a reminder that even a lady of modest means had connections and recourse, and she saw Bennet's expression shift from triumph to frustrated rage. He had failed. She was escaping his reach, removing herself from London and from any possibility that he could force her into marriage. Without her presence in society, his accusations meant nothing, would be dismissed as the ravings of a desperate man attacking a lady who had already withdrawn from the field. One of the gentlemen behind Bennet, Lord Gardner, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I believe this matter is concluded," he said firmly. "Lady Fairfax has explained her presence here satisfactorily. The Duke and Lady Henrietta have demonstrated the innocence of their own situation, and Lady Fairfax's decision to accept a position with her aunt is entirely her own affair. Bennet, I suggest you withdraw your accusations before you find yourself facing challenges from every gentleman present for your slander of ladies under our protection." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled men, and Arabella saw Bennet's face contort with impotent fury. He had overplayed his hand, had made his desperation too obvious, and now found himself facing social censure instead of the triumph he had anticipated. Without another word, he turned and pushed through the crowd, disappearing down the corridor like a beaten dog slinking away from a fight. The other guests began to disperse, the crisis resolved, if not forgotten, already composing the stories they would tell of this evening's drama.